All right, this is Tamara Hansen. I'm here doing my nurse practitioner interview with Dr. Toni Brown, who is a graduate of Rocky Mountain University. So Toni, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us about your credentials?
Sure. So I'm Dr. Toni Brown. I graduated in 2017 with my DNP at Rocky Mountain University. Prior to that, I was an ICU nurse for about 10 years, and I got my Bachelor of Nursing through Dixie. And now I have been working in a pulmonary outpatient clinic ever since then.
Okay, so you work in a specialty clinic, which is pulmonology, and what are some of the things that make up your work environment as far as the people that you work with, other physicians or nurse practitioners? Tell us about that.
So our team here, we have 4 MDs. They split their time between the intensive care unit and the outpatient pulmonary clinic. Typically, they spend anywhere from 1 to 6 days of the month in the clinic. The rest of the time is in the ICU. And then there's 2 nurse practitioners. There's myself and another nurse practitioner. And we manage the outpatient clinic pretty much all the time. But we kind of work as a team. I have my own set of patients, but then I also help out with any of the doctor's patients who need something if they're not available.
Okay. Tell us about the network that you work for. This clinic is part of a larger network, correct?
Yes, so we are with Intermountain Healthcare. It's one of the biggest networks in Utah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long have you been a nurse practitioner, did you say? Did you already tell us that?
Yeah, so I graduated in 2017, got my license in 2017 and started working in December.
And have been working in pulmonology since then? Okay,
yeah.
Perfect. If you can think back to when you first started practicing as a nurse practitioner, what was one or two of the biggest struggles you faced as you transitioned from being a registered nurse to being a nurse practitioner?
I think for me, one of the biggest challenges I had was just confidence in clinical decision making. I had a great team here and I had a great mentor that I worked with, but just feeling comfortable in my own skin took a while, and just being confident in my clinical decision making, making sure that, I wasn't making the wrong decisions for the patients. That was probably one of my biggest challenges.
How did you overcome that challenge?
So I feel lucky because our team here at this clinic, when I started in the clinic, they had never really had a nurse practitioner. They didn't know much about it. So everything was kind of new. We had to create new processes and things like that. But I work with a great team, and they were really willing to kind of work with me and create different ways to help me with that kind of stuff. And so I actually came up with an idea for something called a case review once a week, where we would meet as a team, the pulmonologists and the APPs, and we would go over different patient cases. And so if there was ever a question about a patient, the plan of care that I had, CT scans that were ordered, testing, I would present that patient for review, and we would discuss about everything. And I learned a lot as well, and I think that kind of helped with my confidence in decision making faster than it would have if I was just on my own and I didn't have that support from the team here. And so we do that once a week, and it's actually being adopted throughout Intermountain now for new graduate APPs.
So in essence, what you did was a quality improvement project.
Yes, it was.
In your workplace.
It was,
right.
Actually.
It's one of the reasons why she's my mentor. All right. Consider your scope of practice in the regulatory bodies within your state. Do you agree with the regulations of your licensure designed by the state? And are there any changes you would make, if you could, to the state regulatory practices?
So in the state of Utah, nurse practitioners can pretty much do work independently. The only real regulation is You have to have a referral plan with a medical doctor for Schedule 2s, medications if you're prescribing those. That doesn't affect me too much, but I do feel like nurse practitioners have the clinical judgment to make that decision and to create a referral plan or not need a referral plan. So I think complete autonomy would be great if I could change that. But I think the state of Utah does a pretty good job and has allowed nurse practitioners to have a lot of autonomy. Within my organization, Intermountain doesn't really abide by those. They require you to have a supervising physician, which I would like that to change. That would be nice if we could kind of change that, but that's more of an organizational thing and not necessarily a state regulation.
Having said that, are you still happy working for a large body like Intermountain Healthcare, even though you don't necessarily have as much autonomy as the state of Utah would allow you to have?
Yes, and I think it kind of depends on who you're working with and your team. My doctors and myself, we have a really great relationship. They trust my clinical judgment to the point where I manage mostly all of one of my doctor's outpatients. He'll refer all of them to me because he's just not around as much. And so I don't notice it as much. I think the only difference is that they have to review some of my clinical notes and sign off on them.
Okay.
But that being said, I could see if I didn't work with a team that there was that trusting relationship and you were being questioned, that would be quite frustrating.
Okay. Well, and that leads us into the fourth question about collaboration within your practice, and you've mentioned that a few times. Mm-hmm. It sounds like you work in a very collaborative practice with the physicians that you work with.
Yes.
In talking about the quality improvement project that you instigated and now the practice has adopted, that's a great example of collaboration. Is there anything else you can think of that revolves around the collaboration of your practice with the physicians?
Yeah, I mean, not just physicians, but oftentimes I'll have to refer my patients to a palliative care service because a lot of my patients have chronic lung diseases and they're not going to get better. And I think that's a great service because they're out there in the community and they will communicate with all of the patient's providers. Oftentimes we have to collaborate with cardiologists, ear, nose, and throat, allergists, things like that. And I typically do that, I don't know, all the time. But
so lots of collaboration, not just within the practice, but within community resources as well, or other resources within the community.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for a graduate of this program who wants to break into a specialty like pulmonology? Because it sounds like you said you were the first nurse practitioner to be working in this group down here at Dixie Regional Medical Center in the pulmonology. Do you have any advice to a graduate who would maybe want to follow your path and break into another specialty?
Yeah, my situation was kind of unique because I worked in the intensive care unit, so I worked with a pulmonologist. The way I got my job was kind of interesting. They had a nurse practitioner in this clinic years ago, had a really bad experience with a nurse practitioner who was making poor clinical judgments and diagnosing patients with wrong diagnoses and things like that. So they were really kind of jaded against hiring nurse practitioners. My project, my scholarly project was in the ICU, so I worked really closely with a pulmonologist, and that's when they offered me a job here. But I kind of had to advocate for myself because they said, oh, you should come work in the clinic, but nothing was happening. So I reached out to the manager, kind of gave him my resume, said I would love to work here, and so they kind of created a position in the clinic, and that's how I got my job. But it was all through networking and relationship building. So my advice would be, if you're interested in a certain area, you have to network while you're in your program. Getting good relationships with the people that you do clinicals with. If you're interested in a certain area, reach out to those medical providers, nurse practitioners, MDs. You got to kind of network and get that relationship, and that will help with whatever job you want to get. Another thing you can do is your scholarly project, if you can do it in an area that you would like to eventually work in. That helps as well, because then they can see, your professionalism, your ability to, do process improvement and quality improvement and things like that. So that would be my biggest thing, is it's all about networking. It's about the relationships you have with providers and different people like that, because it is kind of hard to get into specialty at times. Another girl I graduated with did the same thing. Her project was a heart failure clinic, and she ended up getting hired by that clinic.
Okay.
And so
good advice.
yeah, to me, that's what made a difference for my career.
Okay, well, thank you. Last question: have you ever second-guessed your decision to move from being a registered nurse to a nurse practitioner?
No, I'm not gonna lie, there are days that I can't figure out a diagnosis, or I feel like I'm not helping my patients, and you can get discouraged. But the benefits of when, I've caught lung cancer early, or relieved shortness of breath and improved patients' quality of life, those far outweigh the bad days. And I love being able to be more involved in the patient care, in the plan of care. I do miss the adrenaline rush of being in the ICU. I'm not going to lie. That's one thing. That's probably the one thing I miss as a registered nurse, because I'm in a totally different area. But I've never regretted making this decision. I think it's probably the best decision I've made.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time to answer these questions for us. Toni is my mentor. She's actually the reason I went to nursing school, and she's the reason that I am going to become a nurse practitioner. So I really appreciate her and look up to the work that you do. And thank you so much for taking the time. All right.